Hey everyone, good morning. Thanks for joining this month's Ask the Expert session. I'm Corey Burnett and I'll be your proctor today. Before we begin, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. The session will run about 45 minutes to an hour. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentation to minimize background noise. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute and ask the question directly or type them in the chat. Today's topic is emergency action and fire prevention plans. We're covering what to do before, during, and after an emergency. Things like how to safely evacuate, who's in charge of what, and how to make sure your workplace is ready if something goes wrong. We'll also talk about fire prevention basics, how to spot risks early and put steps in place to keep everyone safe. Whether it's a fire, chemical spill, or weather emergency, having a solid plan will make a big difference. Leading today's session is Robert Urey, who's been in the safety world for a long time, and he knows this topic inside and out. He's going to walk us through the essentials, share some practical tips, and answer your questions. So Robert, go ahead and take it from here.
All right, thanks, Corey. Thanks everybody for jumping on this morning. Hope everybody's weathered the storms from last night and your communities didn't get too much damage. So we're going to go through, we're going to talk about emergency action planning. We'll touch on evacuations. We'll spend a little bit more time on weather emergencies just because, unfortunately, if that's time of the year, then the state of Indiana, spring seems to always bring some sort of storms or some sort of disruptions to the area. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll also talk a little bit about active shooter and how that plays into all of this as well. So under OSHA standards 1910, which is the general industry, 0.38, it talks about the requirements for emergency action planning. So basically what it says is, under the general duty clause, it talks about your employer must address, recognize hazards. So, fire and weather emergencies are certainly both recognized hazards for our area. So therefore, we need to make sure that our employees know exactly what to do in those circumstances. So with emergency action plans, again, we need to make sure that we've got, a solid plan. But again, it's not one of those that we wrote the plan, we put it on the shelf, and as soon as the tornado is a mile away, we decide to grab the book and pull it off the shelf. What we really need to make sure we do, because part of the standards in the 1910-38 talks about practice, or talks about going through those actions with your employees. So no matter whether it's an evacuation of the building, if it is severe weather, what to do during that, or most recently with active shooter or workplace violence, exactly what do we do as employers and employees in those circumstances, who's responsible for what in those areas. So with that, whether emergencies demand action. So like I said, we can't just wait until it happens and then try to figure it out there. I'm always a big proponent of muscle memory, which basically what that means is in past lives, we would have some sort of drills at least every quarter, whether it be fire or evacuation, it'd be weather emergencies, active shooter, whatever the case is, so that again, when that event does occur, everybody's not just kind of sitting in shock. What do we do? They've at least got a basic understanding as to where to go to shelter in place, where to go if we do have to evacuate a building, whatever that means is. So with today's day, things that we do, construction, things of that nature, weather emergency or emergency action planning, can be anything from, again, fire, threat of fires, severe weather, Could be a gas leak, where you have to evacuate a building. Could be any other, could be civil disturbance. We need to have plans in place for that as well. So again, just like anything with safety, OSHA just wants to make sure that when the event does occur, that everybody has a understanding as to what to do in those circumstances, so that we're not just basically sitting around, waiting for the disaster to come to us, and we, in a sense, get hurt from that. So, natural disasters, such as floods, um, severe thunderstorms, hot and cold weather emergencies. We'll talk about that. Hurricanes, not so much in Indiana. Wildfires or earthquakes. Earthquakes certainly a possibility in the state of Indiana. Wildfires, maybe not quite as much. Maybe if you live in some of the areas that has state and or federal lands that has a lot of woods and things, maybe that may be a circumstance as well. So again, to make sure that we know what to do in those things. And then man-made causes, such as fires, bombs, chemical spills or attacks. Okay. All right. So, during these types of emergencies, um, you know, we could sustain, bruises, cuts, contusions, broken bones, things of that nature. Again, even if we do have a good plan, we evacuate or we shelter in place and the tornado, maybe hits directly on a building, there's still potential for some sort of injuries there as well. So when you're planning that out, exactly what is the best area to go to, the safest that we can be, and then the same thing, with evacuations and things of that nature, making sure that you got a good solid plan in place so that, if there is a fire, there's smoke, something like that, everybody starts to panic and tries to get out, that we're not creating injuries there as well. So some of the other types of, risks for these types of events here, toxic exposure, possibly even death. But again, putting these things into place gives us a better plan and a better opportunity to, avert some of these types of injuries. So, workplace injuries, um, blood, toxic chemicals, things of that nature. So, if we were to have, a situation where maybe we've sheltered in place and now we've got some people that are hurt, whatever the case is, or a chemical spill, something like that, understanding what, those are, and um, having a plan in place. So we'll talk about that, here in a few minutes when we talk about specific plans, exactly what do we need to do. Not only do we need to make sure that we've got a plan in place for, getting out of the building or sheltering in place or whatever the case is, but then how are we also going to deal with some of these types of possible injuries or even, what do we need to do maybe to sustain for a few hours until emergency services can get us out of maybe some rubble or something. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Live electrical wires, especially for our municipal, our police, our fire, our street departments, when they're going out to do these types of cleanups and severe storms and things of that nature, making sure that you've got a great policy in place when it talks about electrical wires. Most of the members I talk to, their policy is if the wire's down, they don't mess with it until the electric company gets there and takes care of it, which is, great. Um, but also making sure, even with our public safety folks as well, adopting what does that mean so that we're not getting possibly electrocuted in those types of situations of severe weather and things when we're out in the field having to deal with it. Um, some other things, objects falling, if we're in a building, the building starts to get hit with severe weather, tornado, or whatever the case is, possibilities for that. Intense heat, we'll talk about specifically what that means because weather emergencies, may not just be a situation to where, it's a fire or it's severe weather or act of violence, whatever the case is, but also it could be, extreme weather coming through. Um, and the OSHA and IOSHA are going to really focus this year on heat related programs, making sure that you've got a good program for those. So if we've got a heat index, let's say of 110 or whatever that threshold is, um, that we've got a plan in place for rehabilitation or for rotation, or maybe we change the hours that we're going to work or whatever the case is. So again, to make sure that we are keeping our employees safe as we can in those circumstances, and taking precautions to prevent some of those types of injuries. So we'll talk specifically on that in a moment. So ways to protect yourself, you're in a situation where there's fire, smoke, hard to see. Those of you, when I come out to your facilities and we talk about, and you'll hear me say a lot, is you can be in this building for the last 25 years and you know every inch and square foot of this building, every thing sticking out, where every piece of equipment is. But now imagine that, the building's filled with smoke and it becomes dark in there, then how are you going to be able to negotiate that? Again, it's hard to in training to simulate the stress and the emotions and the adrenaline and things of that nature. But again, making sure that all these types of things that we talk about when we talk about emergency exit lighting, we talk about, walkways, things of that nature are all important for this because again, now we're negotiating blind in most circumstances to try to get out of a building. If it's a situation of fire or something of that nature. Blankets and heavy tarps. So again, if you're trapped into an area, maybe there's a lot of smoke, there's a lot of things, and there's the only way you can be safe is you can't exit out through that exit because you're going right into a hazard. And so maybe you got a shelter in place inside of an office or something like that. So in those circumstances, try to make that office as tight as we can. So maybe we're going to put blankets or tarps or something like that down around the cracks so that the smoke doesn't seep in, gives us a little bit more time to affect an evacuation or affect an emergency or emergency services to come in and take care of us. Wet towels. So again, if you've got to go through areas, things of that nature where you're trapped, you have no means of doing anything other than going through and try to exit, putting wet towels over your face, over your nose and mouth will certainly help to filter some of those types of chemicals and things that you're having to negotiate through, again, if it's a fire situation. And then following the escape routes. Um, Avoid elevators. Obviously, we've always been told to utilize the stairwells and those types of emergencies because when emergency services get there, they will typically utilize the elevators if they need to be able to go in and get people that might be trapped in those areas. So at this point, let's just kind of go through and talk about the different types of emergencies that we may encounter, and just kind of give an overview as to what a program should look like in those areas. So we just talked about briefly a little bit about the fire evacuation or evacuating a building for whatever reason. Making sure that we got a good plan in place. So in a plan like that, we need to make sure, and especially if you've got a multi-level building, making sure that you've got a good plan in place to get as many people out of that building as possible. And the reason I state it that way is because there's some buildings where we've got let's say we've got 200 or 300 people in the building and it's multi-level. So we need to take a look and see, do we have employees that are disabled? Do we have visitors that are disabled? People that's going to need assistance to get out of that area? And what are we going to do with those folks? So one of the facilities with South Bend when I was there is we had stair chairs on each floor. But what we found was, through doing evacuations, was if we tried to take them down through the typical emergency evacuation area or the stairs, that now we've got 200 people stacked up behind trying to get out. So developing a plan in those circumstances as to how can we get the most folks out and keep the people that need assistance, keeping them safe as well. Um, maybe a situation where, you've got a fire stairs or something like that. And then in our particular situation, it actually had some landings there and it was sprinkled. So we knew that there was some protection there. We would put them to that area and then let the emergency services folks know exactly where they were so that they could come get them, but our flow could continue on with that. So, things like that we need to think about, if we do have that type of emergency, we've got to evacuate a building. How do we deal with those circumstances? So, as you take a look at your buildings and things of that nature, what type of plan is it? For the most part, if it's a fire or it's evacuation, you need to get out of that building. You need to get away from that hazard and go meet at an assembly point and make sure that there's good accountability. So in a situation, we've got a fire, we've got to evacuate a building, the policy should look and see that, each individual employee's responsibility is to get out of the building. Some places, will teach employees how to utilize a fire extinguisher. But in the circumstances when we were at work, that should only be a situation if it's a very small fire and they want to try to put it out. That depends upon your policy, but their responsibility is to get out of the building. As soon as we start to cross over into that, having them utilize firefighting equipment, things of that nature, then it becomes a whole different training session for those employees. In a sense, they've got to be trained just like a firefighter. So, taking a look at your policy, what does that mean? When I first got to South Bend, they actually had floor captains of each floor that their responsibility was to walk around the whole floor and double check to make sure everybody was out. Well, again, that kind of blurs that line as to now are they a first responder or they're employees. So our program was the fire alarm goes off. Everybody's responsibility was to get out of the area and go to their assembly point. So, whatever that looks like for you, again, we can always replace property. We cannot place people. So we have a fire, we've got to evacuate, we get out of the building, we go to an assembly area, and we get accountability. That's very important for our first responders. So, my goal always was when the first fire department or when the first fire apparatus showed up, that I was able to say, I've got everybody out of the building or I'm missing X amount of people in the building. Because although, that's their job, but they're going to address that emergency differently depending upon if they got people in a building or not. So giving them that information and then also, thinking through with your policy as to what does that mean if it's in the middle of the winter and now we got people outside an assembly point, how do we address that? Do we get with our local transit company and have them bring some buses over and have people load into those so at least they're staying warm? Or do we get a good accountability and we just release everybody to go home, or transport to a different facility, whatever that means for your entity. But it is certainly important that we get that accountability so that we don't have firefighters looking for somebody that maybe is already at home, or whatever that case is. The other piece to that is making sure that when the fire alarm does go off, have it in your policy that there's no such thing as false alarms. So if the alarm goes off, everybody still goes through the motions as far as evacuation for that because you know, as soon as, we have a lot of, well, it's just another false alarm, it's another false alarm. And then when we do have something, people are just going to think, well, we always have false alarms, so it's a false alarm. So, putting that into your policy, putting that into your practices as to if the alarm goes off, everybody evacuates. Um, so again, taking a look at that, and then if we do have a situation where we're able to clear that up, and able to release the folks back into the building, putting into policy whose responsibility is to make that all clear call. Is it the fire department that communicates that back to the employees? Is it the mayor? Is it, who is it in your organization that is the authorized person to be able to have people re-enter into the facility that had a fire alarm go off or we had to evacuate from? So, that's kind of an overview as far as emergency evacuations, fire, things of that nature, but then also in a deeper and not necessarily just for fire, but for any type of emergency, making sure that we've got things in place. So if we do have that disaster or that fire or that tornado or whatever the case is, making sure that we've also got afterward plans. So you know what, our first responders, which in these types of situations, emergency or with severe weather, could very well be our street departments or park departments because they're out in the middle of it, cutting things up, clearing roads, whatever the case is, making sure that those folks also have the tools that they need because sometimes it can be overwhelming for those folks and they just need somebody to talk to. So making sure that we've got that put into place. And then also taking a look and see, if we do lose some buildings, what are some contingency plans that we can put into place? Where are some other buildings that we could set up shop? One of the things that we utilized when I started with the county was we, in a sense, had what was called an office in a box. So we had a enclosed travel trailer that wasn't being used. So we put all the items in there that if we needed to do a pop-up office someplace, at least we had the basic stuff to continue on and continue services for our folks in that area. For the folks that rely on our services, we're able to do that. So, and again, that means, or those types of things to be thinking about, not only for fires, but also tornadoes or other disturbances. The longer that we're down, the more that it could be, because again, citizens are going to be relying on us to do a lot of things. So able to pop that back up or able to get something going again, to do as least the disruption as we can. So let's talk about severe weather. We are in that area right now. Um, we've just experienced, last weekend we experienced some things. Last night, it looks like there were some outbreaks. So again, it's that time of year that we need to be taking a look at what does this mean for our organization. And in a situation like this, it may not just necessarily be, you're assigned to an office. Okay, so if the office is destroyed or damaged, that's one set of things that we need to look at. But we also need to take a look and see, what does this mean for our field employees as well, because they may be out in this as well, and they're certainly going to be exposed to some hazards, in the afterwards. So if we've got a written program and again, a policy procedure that we've practiced, and if it is in a building, making sure that we identify where the safe areas of that building are. If you've got a building that's got a basement, obviously that could be a good place to go as well. If you don't, then going into interior offices are typically bathrooms, things of that nature. And again, the importance of when that happens, everybody goes to that area and accountability for that as well. And we'll talk about. So the other piece to that is taking a look and see who's in charge of monitoring that weather. Is it our emergency? Is our EMA responsible for that? Do you have a safety person on staff? Is it our fire department? So who's responsible for monitoring that and notifying folks as to, hey, we've got a tornado within X amount of miles, and we're requiring everybody to get to shelter at this point. So making sure that we have all of that in place as well, so that again, somebody's watching exactly what's going on in those circumstances. Unfortunately, sometimes, it might be a pop-up area to where we rely just on emergency radios, things of that nature. And, it may be a situation where the alerts doesn't go off until it's right on top of us. So again, having a second set of eyes watching that, so that we're able to get a head start as much as we can to get into those areas. So we get into the evacuation area, or we get into the shelter in place area. And again, making sure that we got good accountability as well. So we talk about the city of South Bend. We had a basement. The problem was, we had 300 employees in this building, and this basement, became very crowded very fast. Um, so making sure that you're identifying, who goes to what area if possible, because again, we want to make sure that we have the best accountability as possible, so that when the event is over, we're able to communicate with emergency services or whatever the case is. We're able to tell them we might be missing somebody, or we've got everybody here as well. So taking a look at that, what does that mean for your evacuation, as far as accountability, and processing that through as well. Now, talking about severe weather with, our field employees. So, first and foremost, trying to make sure that when the severe weather's right on top of us, there's not a whole lot we can do right at that point. So making sure that we're getting into a safe area as safe as possible. Is that inside of a building? Is that inside, maybe it's a possibility that we're in a triaxle truck, that, this is really our only option. Or if we, last means, if we're out on the road, we're out someplace, do we got to pull over, get into a ditch, lowest part, so that if there is tornadoes, things of that nature, that hopefully they go over us. So looking to see, during that event, what does that mean for our organization? What does that mean for the safety of our field employees? How do we deal with that? So afterwards becomes the area of concern with our field employees, because we're going to possibly certainly have trees down into power lines, things of that nature. So taking a look and see what does that mean for our organization? What does our organization, how do we address trees down, things of that nature? We certainly got to make sure that we get the roads open as quick as possible, with trees down across the roads, whatever the case is, so especially for emergency services to get through, things like that. But, do we want to risk our employees' life? If it's a situation where a tree's down and there's electrical wires wrapped up into it. So taking a look and see what does that mean for your organization. Maybe you just have a blank. If it's the lines are down, we don't mess with them until, our local power company gets there and clears it. But there's also some, tools out there that we had utilized in the past, where it was, I believe the name of it was V-Watch. Yeah, it's just a device that would be on each person that was in the field. And if they got within a certain distance of different voltages, it would go off and they would know to stay away from that area. So whatever that means for your organization, how are we going to handle that? But again, making sure that, although we want to make sure we've got things accessible as possible during these events for citizens and things like that, but we don't want to risk our municipal employees' safety to be able to open up that road, 5 minutes before, if we were just waited for an electrician or something. So what does that mean for your organization in the field? How do we address that? So taking a look and see. And the other piece to that is, again, even though they're field employees, things like that, still practice those in our areas of, like just like we would do an evacuation or we would do a shelter in place in a building. Same thing with our field employees. Have them practice what we do in this area. So again, we're not just it's on top of us. We're surprised and we're froze. We're at least got some sort of action that we're going to utilize. The other type of emergency, so OSHA again with 1910, 38 has been, they've addressed evacuation, they've addressed shelter in place for years just because those types of hazards have been around. Um, Unfortunately, with active killing and with workplace violence, active shooter events, now they're starting to come and say, all right, well, although we don't have a direct um, policy for that, but under the general duty clause, you need to let your employees know what is going on. And let's say if it's an active shooter. A lot of our schools that we see that unfortunately have had these types of events, if you follow that, then OSHA comes in behind that and they take a look and they find out that, maybe we didn't have a plan in place so that, our employees didn't know what to do during that event and maybe they froze and maybe they were injured due to that. So making sure that we have a plan in place for active shooter events or workplace violence, things like that. What do we do in those circumstances? And we've always heard the run, hide, fight. So whatever that means for your organization, you know, obviously we always want to make sure to be, our employees need to be where the bad guy's not. So evacuating the facilities or evacuating the area, getting away from that harm is always first and foremost. But it may not be a situation where we're able to do that. So also making sure that we're practicing or we're putting things in place to where, how do we shelter in place? How do we lock ourselves down? And then, ultimately, if we leads to it, what do we do if we confront the bad person? How do we act in those circumstances? So making sure that we have some sort of frequency as to if this were to happen, this is what we would do. Again, there's no playbook, for any of these types of emergencies, but at least having a person not just freeze during that event and possibility of further harm, but at least doing some sort of action to get away from that. So again, with the active shooter, you know, workplace violence, things of that nature, what I had done in the past was we had given them formal training, actually through the ALICE program. And then it was the department's responsibility each year after that to do some sort of additional practice with that. Was it shelter in place? Was it evacuate? Whatever the case is. So again, we're at least keeping these types of things into our muscle memory. So if something does happen, we're doing something and not just sitting in our chair waiting to be harmed. So making sure that you got a plan in place there as well for active shooter, active killing events for your organization, and what does that mean? Okay. And then the final thing that we're going to talk about is severe or extreme weather events, whether it be extreme cold, extreme heat. Like I said before, OSHA and IOSHA are really going to be pushing on heat-related programs this year, just because that's a focused area to where they've seen that there's been some lacking areas. And it's not just necessarily the state of Indiana, but it's across the country to where we don't have plans in place for extreme heat areas. So we take a look and see what does that mean. Let's start off with extreme cold. Making sure that we've got a plan in place. If the wind chill is whatever threshold you set, maybe it's a situation where you need to take a look and see, okay, we're not going to open up the office today, keep everybody home, keep everybody safe from keep them off the roads as much as we can. But then if we've got field employees, things of that nature, what does that mean? Does that mean an altered schedule? Do we, give them more frequent breaks? Do we open up some different areas to where, maybe there's street department and the street department garage is right downtown, and but yet we've got parks facilities on the outskirts or whatever the case is, opening those up for warming centers for those employees to be able to go rest for a few minutes and be able to get back out. Because typically, if it's a really cold event, we're probably going to be dealing with snow and certainly, water main breaks, things like that. So putting that in place, what sort of protections do we take a look and see in those severe cold areas, and what does that mean for each um, each employee throughout our organization? The other one is heat. So we're getting ready to come into that time of year to where we're going to have, extreme heats. We're going to have heat indexes high. One of the tools that OSHA has is a heat index indicator. So it's just an app that anybody can download, and you put in, what the relative humidity is going to be and what the temperature is, and it'll give you it'll pop up a heat index for you, and it'll also give you references as to if it's a heat index of this, here's some precautions that we need to look. So in these types of circumstances, we need to make sure that, we're protecting our employees, especially our field employees in these areas. So what does that mean? Well, OSHA addresses how do we address employee safety is first and foremost, can we engineer this out? So is it a process to where can we have something else take care of this task without human interaction as much as possible? If that's not the case, then we take a look at administrative controls. So maybe we've got a high heat index that's going to be expected for tomorrow, and we've got a paving project that is scheduled for tomorrow. So what does that look like? Maybe we come in and start that project earlier in the morning when it's cooler, and we break off during the day and maybe come back in the evening when it cools back down. Maybe we reassign that to, a different time where it's not quite as hot. Um, or do we put things in place as far as, one of the things that we always done, we had a heat index was with our street departments is maybe they would typically have a crew of 5 people, and during high heat index areas, it may go to 6 or 7 people. So that way somebody is always able to be able to rehab, getting over, get some water, getting into a vehicle and cooling off, whatever the case is. Um, one of the biggest things for the heat index obviously is hydration. So what does that look like for your organization? Well, I'm sure a lot of you, still have bottled water. We've got the water coolers, things of that nature, but also take a look and see outside of that, because again, you're out working day in, day out, you're drinking water. It becomes kind of a boring thing to where you don't want to drink any more water, right? So maybe we take a look at now, maybe we've got electrolyte juices, things of that nature we introduce. So it gives a little bit of break, but also it's got some benefits. Develop a program to where maybe we hand out electrolyte popsicles, or possibly even, some sort of ice cream or something, take an ice cream break. So again, it's a big piece there to where, in those circumstances, it kind of breaks up that, the heat and monotony of what we're doing. We're able to take a break. And if we've got electrolytes in those things, then we're able to, get some benefit of that as well. So what does that look like for your organization? How do we do that? Again, thinking outside the box sometimes always, helps as well. Even if nothing, just for our psyche, it helps in those circumstances. Okay, so that's kind of the emergencies that we covered. We talked about, how you can get hurt in these circumstances. Again, we talked about the alarms. What does this look like? Having a policy is there's no false alarm. Everybody acts in the middle or when that goes off. Know where your exits are in fire or evacuation areas. pressing the kill switch. If you're in an area where maybe you've got conveyors and things of that nature, make sure that we're addressing that. So if it is a fire, that we're not continuously keeping that conveyor going and transferring from one part of the building to another part of the building with that conveyor system. Utilization of fire extinguishers correctly. So again, what does that mean for your organization? Certainly, if you're going to require them to utilize firefighting equipment, then there's a whole different standard that we need to make sure that they train on. And most organizations, some bigger organizations, we take a look at steel mills, things like that. They may have their own fire brigade or their fire crew, which might make sense. But, what does that look like for your organization as well? We can't put them into a situation without proper training. Meeting places, so we talked about that. If we've got to evacuate, or even if we've got a shelter in place, making sure that we've got a good designated area so that we're getting good accountability. And when the first responders get there, we're able to give them the best information that we've got. Okay. Be alert for alarms. So again, what does that mean for your organization? Maybe you don't have a formal program. Maybe you don't have fire alarms in your buildings. So making sure that we're developing a program that, how do we notify people if there is a fire? Or how do we notify people that if there's severe weather? A lot of times with the phones that we have, there's a lot of capabilities there that we can send messages across the phone, send messages through portals, things of that nature. So what does that look like? But again, if we're in a shop or something like that, maybe it's just as simple as a bullhorn and somebody gets on it and, announces to everybody to get out of the building, or maybe it's an air horn or whatever the case is. So need to have something, even if we don't have alarms, we need to have some sort of way of notifying people as to exactly what that is. Follow directions of the PA system. So again, maybe it's a PA system that we go on and we talk about, getting out of the building or addressing that. If time permits, turning off the equipment. So again, what does that mean? If it's an organization, is there critical equipment that we need to shut down during this operation? Or is there critical equipment that we need to monitor during this situation because it has to stay on for whatever reason? So whatever that looks like for your organization, addressing those types of pieces of equipment as well. If it needs to be a kill switch or to shut it off, understand everybody how to do or how to do that. One of the things I would also really encourage is if you've got a fire sprinkler system in your building, is making sure that people know how to use or to shut that down if they need to. So, if we have an accidental, a sprinkler head gets accidentally hit and it starts flowing water, well, it's going to continue to flow water until somebody shuts that off. And if you got to wait for your contractor to come out and do that, it could be an hour or two before they get to you. And, how much water is that in your facility during that? So making sure that you know where to go to your standard, your pipes, stands, and things of that nature, how to shut those off, and what that means for your organization, to keep that water from flowing. And if it is a situation where maybe we got a malfunction of something, so addressing that as well. Um, any type of emergency, making sure that, our exit signs, our exit lights, things of that nature are all functional. That's the reason when we go through um, and we do these pre-inspections that we preach, because we don't want to find out that our emergency exit doesn't work right in the middle of emergency situation we're dealing with. So making sure that we have some sort of frequency that we're checking those so that we're able to address that before emergency happens. All right. Prevention, some of these types of emergencies, fire, there's things that we can prevent from or utilize so that we've got prevention and we don't start fires, being hot work permits, things like that, hot work areas, putting things in place as to, we've got fire watches, whatever, so that we're not creating that hazard by some sort of activity that we're doing. So making sure that we are up to speed on those, and we got a good robust program so that we are trying to minimize as much as we can. All right, so weather emergencies. So we talked about winter storms, severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, hurricanes, wildfires, severe summer heat. We talked about that as well, making sure that we've got a plan in place for that. Um, water, some of our areas maybe deal with flooding, things of that nature. So what does that mean, for our employees, making sure that they've got the right tools and they've got the right protective equipment when they're working in those areas. So normally, we may need to trade in our traffic vest for a, um, float device where we've got to put on and work around those areas. So what does that mean for your areas or your organizations as well? All right, earthquakes. So a little bit, we do deal with that, but like I said before, making sure that we've got a plan in place that if we were to get stuck into a building, let's say we got an earthquake and we can't get out of the building. We've got emergency services come in there to help us, but how can we sustain during those? So making sure that we've got folks that are trained in first aid CPR, understand how to utilize tourniquets, understand how to deal with these type of injuries or these type of circumstances. So we got somebody in that area having folks that are able to address or self-sustain some sort of emergencies until emergency service can show up and get to us. So making sure we got a plan in place for that. If we do have let's say an earthquake, we're stuck in a building, what does that mean? How do we deal with this? All right. So emergency situations increase obviously the risk of injuries to our employees. What alarms, what does the alarm sound like? What is your notification? So if we've got a severe weather, we've got a fire, we've got whatever, how are we notifying our employees to be able to act in those circumstances? Again, it could be anything from a commercial fire alarm in our building to maybe it's just an air horn and everybody knows that the air horn goes off 3 times, it's to get out of the building. So at least some sort of way to notify our employees to get out of the building or get to shelter because we've got some potential weather coming. Where to go, where to report. So again, making sure that we got those designated areas and we got the accountability the best that we can. All right. So that kind of goes through, kind of the very high level of emergencies that we deal with, whether it be evacuations or be severe weather, whatever the case is. But at least with the severe weather, we certainly need to be making sure that we've got a program in place so that we're able to do that. And maybe it's a situation where we've got a program in place, but yet we find some flaws in it. So if we do have an emergency, let's say a severe weather outbreak, and we got to deal with that, then making sure that we are able to come back and revisit that. So after the emergency, have some sort of debriefing or have some sort of you know take a look and see as to what happened during this situation and what can we do to improve it. Maybe one of the things that we learned with our evacuations was when we evacuated all 300 people from a building, we had about 6 different um, designated areas for them to go. And to be able to get the information back to the emergency services quickly, we had to implement radios so that more than one person was going and checking on those areas to make sure for accountability. So again, always revisiting that, taking a look and see what else can we do to improve that to be able to help for the next event. All right. So give you a little bit of time back, but again, take a look at your organization, take a look at your programs. If you need help, certainly reach out to us and we can help you with that, whether it be templates or it be trainings or whatever the case is. But again, we just want to make sure, we are a partner here for you guys to be able to put those programs in place. And then again, because of IPEP, with as many members as there are, as we've got a lot of organizations that may have a very good weather evacuation program, but don't have the greatest fire program. So, you know, maybe we can talk to other organizations and say, hey, what does yours look like, and can they borrow it? So again, just making sure that we got employees safe as possible, and that we're trying to look for any of these dangerous areas as much as possible. All right, if there's no questions, then I appreciate your time this morning. And if you do got questions, certainly email them to us. Um, you know, phone call, whatever the case is. You got my contact information, but just reach out to IPEP, and we'll help as much as we can. All right, thank you for your time, and we'll see you next month.